You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh, and we return to our top story about the interim budget, India's interim budget being presented tomorrow by Finance Minister. And to talk about the state of Indian economy and the expectations from the budget, we are joined exclusively by V. Ananth Nageshwaran, Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. We'll be connecting with him in just a bit. Dr. V. Ananth Nageshwaran will be joining us. He's the Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. The Union Budget is going to be presented tomorrow, that is Thursday. It is going to be an interim budget. The government is set to face election in the weeks ahead. In view of that, it is going to be an interim budget, not a full-fledged budget. The budget will be presented in the new Parliament House by Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. The state of the Indian economy is something that we're going to discuss. Indian economy registering over 7% growth, and also the projection is for a similar growth rate ahead, making it one of the fastest growing large economy. In just a bit, joining us now, in fact, is Dr. V. Ananth Nageshwaran, Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. Dr. Nageshwaran, good evening and welcome. Great to have you with us on the eve of the Union interim budget. So, sir, amidst the serious global crisis, if you can first help us understand what has immuned and propelled India's growth story, a projection of over 7% growth, making India the fastest growing large economy. Sir.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. What has distinguished India from the rest of the world, especially the large economies, by growing at 7% or more in the last 2 years, and more likely to repeat that feat this year and possibly in the next financial year? The fundamental reason is that we managed the COVID pandemic far better. We did not splurge. Monetary and fiscal stimulus were measured, targeted and prudent, and they were withdrawn in time, especially the monetary stimulus. And then came the conflict in Ukraine, and India managed to secure energy supplies at reasonable prices for the Indian economy. These were the two immediate post-2020 actions that I can think of. But more than that, in the previous 6 years before the pandemic, several important structural reforms have taken place. India cleaned up the balance sheets of the financial sector, especially public sector banks. The Indian government invested in public infrastructure, both physical and digital infrastructure. It enabled financial inclusion with the PM Jan Dhan Yojana program, and 55% of the new account holders are women. And then India also ensured that the digital infrastructure evolved that allowed MSMEs to be able to access finance and also tap into newer markets. So I think a combination of all these various immediate responses to the pandemic and the energy situation arising out of the conflict in Ukraine, and the delayed impact of the long-term structural reforms. I should have also added the implementation of GST, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, and continued focus on the ease of doing business. All these things have kept the Indian economy in good shape and in a good position to continue to grow healthily, not only as it is doing right now, but also in the years ahead.
In the context of the growth story, Dr. Nageshwaran, how do you reflect on the debate between the quantum of growth versus the quality of growth? How well has India been able to tackle challenges of inequality and unemployment?
That is a fair question. I think the inequality challenge is addressed through generous government benefits. The Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana has been extended for 5 years for 800 million people, or 80 crore people. And the government has come up with the PM Awas Yojana. Every house now gets water connectivity. And there is a program for Ayushman Bharat health insurance. And also for farmers, there is crop insurance, apart from the fact that the minimum support prices have been increased. So if you look at inequality after taking into account government's taxes and the transfers it makes to poorer households, then the inequality discussion recedes considerably. As far as the unemployment rate is concerned, I think it is a fact that from the highs of the 20% that we reached during COVID time, urban unemployment rate is now down at 6.6%. Labor force participation rate for both men and women have increased. And in the agriculture sector, many women have joined the workforce, but not for subsistence work or for supporting their family farms. Data tells us that they are now participating in market-oriented activities for which they are compensated. Basically, what has happened is India was indeed transferring surplus labor from agriculture into services and manufacturing. And COVID interrupted that process, which saw some reverse migration happening back to rural India. Now, after 2 years, we are once again beginning to witness, and data will tell us that it actually accelerated in 22-23 and 23-24. But right now, we have data only up to 21-22. It shows us that agricultural employment declined in 21-22 after picking up in 1920 and 2021. And manufacturing is beginning to create jobs aplenty, as is the construction sector. So I think India's employment market, labor market is healthy. Much more remains to be done, of course. We are not unaware of the challenges, regular job contracts, skilled workforce, and formal creation of more formal jobs, etc. All these things need to be pursued even more in the coming years. But the labor market is healthy.
Okay. Sir, one of the remarkable achievements of the welfare measures is, if you look at the Niti Aayog report, it talks about poverty alleviation. Yeah. Some 25 crore people have been lifted out of poverty in the last decade. Now, since we're having this conversation ahead of interim budget, what will it take to sustain and take this poverty alleviation measure forward?
Well, whatever brought us the success that we have achieved in the last almost 10 years will propel us forward as well. And I mentioned some of those measures. Yes. The government's targeted relief, not only during COVID, but even before that. I mean, the spread of the direct benefit transfer program to include hundreds of schemes, both in cash and in kind, and the amount of money disbursed directly to households, to farmers, and also providing them with free food for 5 years and affordable housing, water, sanitation. All these measures are going to keep our workforce productive and being able to participate in the economy through gainful employment and generation of incomes, and that will see accelerated reduction in the multidimensional poverty index percentage. So what has worked in the last 10 years will continue to work for us in the coming years as well.
You mentioned GST earlier. How do you see the role of tax reforms like the GST? In fact, the latest numbers have just come in. GST collections register some over 10% year-on-year growth.
That's right. 1.72 lakh crores, yes. 1.72
for January, yes.
129 to be very precise. For the month of January, of course. I think GST has weathered a lot of storm, especially the COVID and the controversy over the compensation cess continuation, etc. But states are now seeing that their GST collections are growing faster than they used to in the pre-GST era. And it is also facilitating economic efficiency. The trucks are able to travel more distance. There is at least a 45 to 50% increase in the distance covered by trucks. Logistics costs have come down because of the abolition of octroi posts and one single tax rate, etc. So the efficiency gains of GST are flowing through. That is, of course, an indirect tax reform measure. In the direct tax measure, the government has given people the option to choose, and the corporates as well, to choose between the old tax regime and the new tax regime. They can, for individuals especially, they can move back and forth between the two regimes for every financial year. Therefore, they can choose the most optimal tax payment, most optimal tax regime that suits them. And there are also many tax administration measures taken to make payment of taxes and interaction with the tax department as non-intrusive and as smooth as possible. Much more can be done with respect to angel taxes or capital gains tax rationalization or further direct tax reforms, etc. But India today, especially for businesses, has one of the most reasonable tax structures in the world, and therefore considerable tax reform measures. Of course, the most notable one being GST introduction. Considerable tax reform measures, including tax administration reform measures, have been taken in the last 10 years.
And so you made an interesting link between the GST and the manner in which it helps improve logistics. What helps with logistics is also state-of-the-art infrastructure. In the previous budget, we saw record capex allocation upwards of 10 lakh crore. How do you read the impact of it on Indian economy?
No, I think we are talking about the record allocation to capital expenditure, not only by the union government for its own spending, but also the 50-year loan it gave to the states in the previous financial year of 1 lakh crore and the current financial year of 1.3 lakh crores. But the point is, we are focusing on these two big numbers, but the emphasis on capital expenditure predates these last two financial years. It has been rising ever since FY15, 2014-15. And if you include union government and public sector enterprises and grants for capital expenditure, the expenditure has grown by more than 3 times from around, I'm just quoting from memory, from around 5.5 lakh crores to about 18 point something lakh crores. So capital expenditure thrust is not a phenomena of last just 2 years, but much longer than that. And clearly you see that in every city, in the number of airports. I mean, we just doubled the number of airports in the last 10 years, what we could build in the previous 7 decades. And the total length of the national highways has gone up by 50%. The turnaround time in Indian ports has halved. And then you talk of metro rail network now spans more than 900 kilometers, and electricity generation, installed capacity of non-fossil fuels, and for the first time you have a national grid connecting northern and southern grid, and that's why no longer, load shedding is something that we used to read about quite frequently in the past, but we don't read about them now. And therefore, I think these are all the visible signs of the improvement in infrastructure. I mean, that's why I mentioned for your very first question, not just the post-pandemic reform measures, but also the lagged effect of all the reforms undertaken since 2014 are now beginning to pay off, as giving us almost 3 full years of growth post-COVID at 7% or more, and probably extending into next financial year as well.
And so you mentioned about the energy reforms as well. How is India balancing the issue of energy security and energy transition? With this gas-based economy, there is focus on renewables as well.
That's right. No, I think India is doing a very fine balancing act, notwithstanding the unreasonable pressures emanating from other parts of the world, developed countries, forcing developing countries to concentrate on energy transition at this stage. Energy security is important for economic growth, and that is what those countries enjoy on their path to development and advanced country status. And we need that. And for that, I think fossil fuels are an important part of the energy fuel mix. Each country must choose a fuel mix that is suitable for its circumstances. And that is the whole concept of a common but differentiated responsibilities in consideration with national circumstances, based on national considerations and capabilities. So India actually has been concentrating on increasing the non-fossil fuel generation capacity At the same time, having a fossil fuel mix as well, which are important to propel our economic growth, because ultimately, you need economic growth to be able to generate investable resources. One cannot depend on foreign resources to finance our economic growth or energy transition. The markets will resist providing vast sums of money to large countries like India. Therefore, we do have to grow, generate our own savings, and provide for energy transition as appropriate. And I think India is walking the fine balancing act far better than many other nations are able to do.
Okay, and Dr. Nageshwaran, finally, if I can just briefly speak to you about budget expectations. Prime Minister speaks about Viksit Bharat, developed India on 4 strong pillars: youth power, women power, farmers, and the poor. What can we expect in the budget in terms of taking the priorities further?
Well, I think it's a matter of continuity. The last several budgets for the last 10 years has focused on building up the productive potential of the economy. That will continue. The emphasis on infrastructure, the commitment to fiscal stability and prudence. So in a sense, the Honorable Finance Minister in her last 5 budgets, and this will be her 6th, she has emphasized she has basically made it her hallmark or stamp under the guidance of the Honorable Prime Minister that while there is important focus on economic development, it doesn't come at the cost of fiscal prudence and macroeconomic stability. You will see all those elements in tomorrow's budget as well.
On that note, Dr. Nageshwaran, thank you very much for joining us on NewsHour and sharing your perspective.
You're welcome.
That was Chief Economic Advisor to Government of India speaking exclusively with DD India.